if China decided tomorrow to restrict or cut off exports of rare earth minerals, a lot of things that power every day, American life would suddenly become more expensive and harder to get. Most people do not think about this stuff until prices go up or their favorite products get delayed. But the reality is that China controls the majority of the world's supply of these critical materials, and that control creates real risks for your wallet, your investments, and the broader US economy. Right now, China dominates both the mining and processing of rare earth elements. These materials are used in everything from the magnets inside electric vehicle motors to the components in your smartphone, laptops, wind turbines, and advanced military equipment. Without them, modern technology as we know it becomes much more difficult and costly to produce. The problem is not that these minerals do not exist elsewhere. The problem is that almost no other country has built the full supply chain needed to mine, process, and refine them at scale. That leaves the United States and its allies heavily dependent on one source. Think about what this actually means in practical terms. If supply gets disrupted, the cost of building new electric cars goes up. Companies like Tesla and other EV makers either raise prices or accept lower profits. That directly affects how fast Americans can switch to cleaner vehicles and how much you pay at the dealership. The same thing happens with smartphones and other electronics. Higher production costs usually end up getting passed along to consumers. And when big tech and clean energy companies face these kinds of headwinds, their stock prices often react. A lot of people have exposure to these companies through their 401 kiloseconds or individual investments without realizing how tied they are to supply chains that run through China. This situation did not happen overnight. For years, China made strategic investments in rare earth mining and processing, while the United States and other Western countries largely stepped away from it. It was cheaper and simpler to import the finished materials than to deal with the environmental and technical challenges of producing them domestically. That decision made sense at the time for short-term costs, but it created a long-term vulnerability. Now, whenever tensions between the US and China rise, this becomes one of the most effective pressure points China can use. They have shown in the past that they are willing to limit exports during trade disputes, and the leverage has only grown stronger as global demand for these materials has increased. The uncomfortable part is how concentrated the risk really is. Even if the United States and its allies start building new mines and processing plants today, it will take many years before they can meaningfully reduce dependence. Environmental regulations, technical expertise, and infrastructure all take time to develop. In the meantime, any serious conflict or major breakdown in relations could create sudden shortages. That kind of shock would not just affect big corporations. It would ripple through to regular Americans in the form of higher prices on cars, phones, appliances, and even defense-related spending that eventually shows up in taxes and government budgets. A lot of investors assume that market will eventually solve this through new supply coming online, but markets move much faster than physical supply chains can be built. In the short term, uncertainty itself becomes the problem. When news breaks about new restrictions, export limits, or rising tensions, stock prices in affected sectors can swing sharply. Tech stocks, clean energy companies, and defense contractors are all more exposed than most people realize. If you have money in broad market funds or individual tech names, this is one of the quieter risks sitting underneath your portfolio. It is also worth thinking about how this connects to everyday life beyond just prices. Electric vehicle adoption is a major national priority for reducing emissions and dependence on foreign oil. But if the materials needed to build those vehicles become more expensive or scarce, progress slows down. The same applies to renewable energy projects that rely on powerful magnets made from rare earths. What looks like a simple materials issue on paper actually touches energy policy, climate goals, national security, and your personal finances all at once. Right now, the United States is trying to catch up through legislation and partnerships with allies. Efforts are underway to develop domestic sources and friend-shore parts of the supply chain. These are positive steps, but they are still in early stages. The gap between current dependence and real independence remains wide. That gap is exactly where the risk lives. If something happens before those alternatives are ready, the adjustment will be painful and expensive. This is why paying attention to geopolitics matters even if you are not someone who follows international news closely. Decisions made in Beijing about export policies can show up months later in the price of a new car or the performance of certain stocks. It is not abstract. It is connected to the things you buy and the investments you hold. Most people only start paying attention after the impact has already arrived. By then, options are more limited. The core issue is simple but serious. One country holds dominant control over materials that modern economies cannot easily replace in the short term. That creates leverage, and leverage creates risk for American investors and consumers. The smart move is to understand where that risk exists rather than being surprised when it shows up in higher costs or market volatility. The supply chain for these critical materials is one of the clearest examples of how geopolitics and everyday economics are now deeply connected. Ignoring it does not make the vulnerability go away. It just means you will feel the effects without having seen them coming. What makes this risk even more pressing is that the demand for these materials is only going up. Electric vehicles, renewable energy, advanced defense systems, and next-generation electronics all require more rare earths, not less. As the world pushes toward cleaner technology and stronger military capabilities, the pressure on existing supply chains will grow. If China maintains its grip, while alternatives remain years away, the window for smooth adjustments gets smaller every year. That means sudden price spikes or shortages could hit harder and faster than many people expect. For someone trying to build wealth or simply keep up with rising costs, this is not a distant problem. It is a factor that can quietly shape both your monthly expenses and your long-term investment returns. The more aware you are of these connections, the better positioned you are to avoid being caught off guard when the next disruption arrives. If this explanation helped you see the real risks behind the headlines, hit the like button so more people can find it. Subscribe to the channel for more straightforward breakdowns on how geopolitics and global events actually affect your money, your investments, and everyday costs. Drop a comment below and let me know what other topics like this you want me to cover next. Thanks for watching.